Welcome to Policy Precision, your unbiased dive into executive orders. I'm Ethan Caldwell, and I'll be breaking down the details. And I'm Nora Harper, here to look at the human side of these policies. Today, we are digging into Executive Order 14191. It's all about a concept it calls educational freedom. Right, and this order jumps straight into one of the most intense debates in the country. And really, it all boils down to one big question about how our schools get their money.
Exactly, and that brings us to the big idea behind this whole thing, which you can frame as a simple question. What if school funding actually followed the student, not the institution? This one concept, you'll see, is the engine driving everything else in this order. The whole idea is to shift the power to let families decide where those education dollars really belong.
Yep. So before we can even get into the solution this order is proposing, we have to understand the problem it says it's trying to solve. Section 1 of the order lays out the administration's diagnosis of the current state of education. The order wastes no time and kicks things off with a pretty stark number to make its case. It points to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. You might know it as the NAEP, and it highlights that almost 3/4, 72% of 8th graders in the U.S. are below proficient in math. That statistic becomes the entire foundation for their argument.
And you know, these aren't just abstract numbers on a chart. That 72% in math and a very similar 70% in reading, that represents a massive challenge for millions of families who just feel like the system isn't working for their children. The order really frames this as a crisis of confidence in the local public schools people are assigned to.
And it doesn't stop there. The order then connects this academic problem directly to the family budget. It argues that because schools are assigned based on your address, it drives up the cost of housing in districts with so-called good schools. This creates an impossible choice for so many people. Either pay a crazy premium you can't afford for a house, or accept a school you don't feel good about. The order calls this a major financial strain on millions. Okay, so the problem has been defined: low test scores and a huge financial burden on families. From there, the order pivots to what it sees as the solution. And that brings us to the core policy, which is all built around this one idea of educational choice.
So what do they mean by educational choice? Well, to put it simply, it's the idea that public education funds should be portable. Families should be able to use that money for a bunch of different options, not just the public school down the street, but maybe a charter school, a private school, or some other alternative. And this all boils down to one simple policy goal, stated right there in the text: to support parents in choosing and directing the upbringing and education of their children. It's really presented as a tool to empower parents, a direct response to those challenges we just talked about. All right, so we've got the problem and the proposed policy. But an executive order is nothing without a plan of action. So how does the government actually plan to do this? The next sections get into the specifics, directing federal departments to figure out how to promote school choice using the money and programs they already have.
And here's where the rubber meets the road. The order gives specific homework to different departments. The Department of Education has to create guidance for states on using federal funds for choice. Labor and HHS are told to look at their grant programs and find opportunities. And the Departments of Defense and the Interior have to create plans for the specific people they serve, like military families and Indigenous students. And get this, they're not messing around with the timeline here. This isn't some long-term study group. The Department of Education has just 60 days to get its guidance out. The other departments, they have 90 days to submit their plans directly to the president. That signals a real sense of urgency. Okay, so there's an action plan, and it's on a fast track. But the order gets even more granular. It's not just talking about families in a general sense. It actually singles out a few specific groups it wants to help. This is where the policy tries to connect on a much more personal level with people in unique situations. The order specifically names 3 groups for this focused support. First, low-income and working families. Second, military-connected families. And third, children who are eligible for Bureau of Indian Education, or BIE schools. So let's break down what the order says for each of them. For low-income families, the spotlight is on the Department of Health and Human Services. It's basically told to figure out how existing money, like the Child Care and Development Block Grant, could be used to give these families more educational options, which could include private or even faith-based schools. Then you have military families.
I mean, they move constantly, having to figure out a new school system every couple of years. So the Department of Defense is instructed to find ways its current budget can help those kids attend a school of their choice no matter where their parents get stationed.
And finally, for children eligible for Bureau of Indian Education schools, the Department of the Interior has to come up with a plan. The goal is to allow federal funds to follow those students to other educational options. The order also demands a report on how BIE schools are performing right now, using that data as the reason for this push.
So we've walked through the problem they cite, the policy of choice, and the specific action plan for different groups. Let's step back and just boil this all down. What is the big takeaway here? What is this executive order really doing?
At its heart, this executive order is a directive. It's an instruction. It tells the major federal agencies to go through their budgets, look at all their programs, and find every possible way to use the money they already have to support school choice initiatives that are happening at the state level.
And that is such a critical point. This order isn't creating new programs. It's not asking Congress for a single new dollar. It is all about reprioritizing existing federal funds. It's about changing the purpose, not the size, of the government's checkbook, and putting what the administration calls education freedom at the top of the list. Which, of course, leaves us with the massive question that an order like this forces everyone to think about. If federal policy really does shift its focus toward choice, what does that actually mean for the future of our traditional public school system?
It's a question with huge implications, for sure. Thanks for joining us on Policy Precision.